The Galactic Council had ruled the stars for 12,000 years. Every species that learned to travel between worlds eventually received a summons to appear before the Council. Every species came. Every species listened. Every species accepted whatever terms the Council offered, because refusing meant standing alone against the most powerful organization in the known universe. Humanity received its summons on a cold morning in January. The message arrived at Earth's diplomatic headquarters, transmitted across thousands of light years in an instant. The Council demanded that human representatives appear at Nexus Prime, the great station that served as the seat of galactic government. The message did not explain why. It did not need to. When the Council called, you answered. Ambassador read the summons 3 times before setting it down on her desk. She was 53 years old, with dark hair turning gray at the temples and deep lines around her eyes. She had spent 30 years negotiating treaties, resolving conflicts, and representing humanity's interests among the stars. She had seen enough of galactic politics to know that this summons meant trouble. Marshall, her young aide, stood nervously by the door. He was 28, fresh from the diplomatic academy, and this would be his first mission to Council space. His hands shook slightly as he held his tablet. "What do they want?" he asked. Turned to look out the window at the city below. Flying vehicles moved between towering buildings, and in the distance, she could see the spaceport where ships departed for distant worlds every hour. Humanity had come so far in 200 years, from a species that had never left its home planet to one that had colonized dozens of worlds across the galaxy. "They want to put us in our place," she said quietly. "We've grown too fast, expanded too far. The older species are worried." Worried about what? About losing their power, about sharing the galaxy with someone who doesn't play by their rules. She turned back to face him. "Pack your bags, we leave tomorrow." The journey to Nexus Prime took 3 weeks. Their ship, the diplomatic vessel Endurance, was fast by human standards, but the Council station was far from Earth, located in a region of space that humanity had never visited. Spent the journey studying everything she could find about the Council, its history, its member species, and its methods. The Council had been founded by 5 species 12,000 years ago. In the beginning, it had been a simple alliance for mutual protection and trade. Over time, it had grown into something much larger. New species were discovered, contacted, and brought into the fold. Some joined willingly. Others had no choice. The Council maintained peace, but it was the peace of the strong ruling the weak. Read accounts of species that had refused Council demands. The stories did not end well. Sanctions, blockades, and eventually military force. No species had successfully the Council in over 8,000 years. Those that tried were crushed, their civilizations reduced to shadows of what they had once been. On the final day of the journey, brought her a tablet containing the Council's formal proposals. She read them in silence, her expression growing darker with each line. "This is worse than I expected," she said when she finished. Nodded, he had read the proposals himself. "They want us to give up the colony. That's 3 million people, Ambassador. 3 million humans who built their homes there, raised their families there. And the fleet reductions. 60% of our ships decommissioned or destroyed," shook her head slowly. "They're not asking us to compromise, they're asking us to cripple ourselves." "What are we going to do?" Was quiet for a long moment. She thought about the history she had studied, the species that had submitted and survived, diminished but alive. She thought about the ones that had fought and lost. And she thought about humanity, young and strong and unwilling to bow. "I need to speak with Earth," she said. "Arrange a secure channel." The conversation with the President and the Security Council lasted 4 hours. Explained the situation, the demands, and the consequences of refusal. The leaders of humanity listened, asked questions, debated among themselves. In the end, they reached a decision. Received her instructions just as the Endurance dropped out of faster-than-light travel near Nexus Prime. She read them twice, then deleted the message. There could be no record of what she was about to do. Nexus Prime was the largest artificial structure had ever seen. It hung in space like a small moon, covered in lights and docking ports and sensor arrays. Thousands of ships surrounded it, vessels from dozens of species, all coming and going on the business of galactic civilization. The Endurance docked at a port reserved for new arrivals, and stepped off the ship into a world unlike anything on Earth. The air smelled different, filtered and recycled and carrying traces of alien atmospheres. The walls were made of materials that shifted color as they watched, and everywhere there were aliens. Had met representatives of other species before, but never so many in one place. Tall, slender beings with 4 arms walked beside squat creatures covered in scales. Floating spheres of light drifted past entities that seemed to be made entirely of liquid. The diversity was overwhelming, and yet noticed something else. The way the aliens looked at her. The way they stepped aside as she passed. Not respect. Something closer to curiosity, mixed with something that might have been pity. They know why we're here, she realized. They know what the Council is going to do to us. The Council chamber was designed to make visitors feel small. It rose 700 meters from floor to ceiling, with seats arranged in a spiral that climbed toward the distant roof. Thousands of representatives sat in those seats, watching as and walked the long path to the speaking platform at the center. At the top of the spiral, on a platform that overlooked everything else, sat the High Counselor. Han was a member of one of the founding species. His body was segmented like an insect's, with dozens of small eyes that reflected the chamber's lights. He had ruled the council for 200 years, and in that time, he had never failed to bring a young species to heel. Ambassador, his translated voice echoed through the chamber. Humanity has been granted a great honor today. The Council has reviewed your species' expansion and determined that certain adjustments must be made for the harmony of all. Reached the speaking platform and stopped. She looked up at the High Counselor, at the thousands of watching aliens, at the holographic displays that showed billions more observing from across the galaxy. High Counselor, she said, her voice steady and clear, I have reviewed the Council's demands thoroughly. Proposals, Han corrected. We prefer to call them proposals. They are, of course, open to negotiation. Took a deep breath. She thought about Earth, about the colonies, about the millions of humans who were counting on her. She thought about the instructions she had received, the decision that had been made. I understand, she said. However, I must inform the Council that the United Earth Government has instructed me to deliver the following response. She paused. The chamber was completely silent. No. The word echoed through the vast space. For a moment, nothing happened. Then Han's many eyes blinked in confusion. In the seats above, representatives turned to each other, uncertain if they had heard correctly. I'm sorry, Han said. Perhaps the translation matrix has malfunctioned. Could you repeat your response? His expression did not change. The translation is accurate, High Counselor. The answer is no. Humanity will not surrender our colony. We will not reduce our fleet. We will not accept your terms. These proposals are unacceptable, and we will not negotiate under these conditions. The chamber exploded into chaos. High Counselor Han had lived for 400 years. He had seen empires rise and fall. He had watched species destroy themselves in foolish wars. He had guided the Council through crises that threatened to tear the galaxy apart. But in all his long life, he had never seen anything like this. The chamber was in complete disorder. Representatives were shouting over each other, their translated voices creating a wall of noise that made it impossible to think. Some demanded immediate action against the humans. Others called for calm and discussion. A few simply sat in stunned silence, unable to process what they had just witnessed. Ambassador of the collective was the loudest voice in the chaos. They were a reptilian species, aggressive and proud, and was the most aggressive and proud among them. His scaled body trembled with rage as he pointed at the human delegation. "This is an outrage," he roared. "An insult to every member of this council. These primitives dare to refuse us. They dare to stand in this chamber and say no to the combined will of galactic civilization." Other voices joined his, calling for sanctions, for blockades, for military strikes, stood calmly on the speaking platform, waiting for the noise to die down. Marshall stood behind her, his face pale but determined. Han raised one of his manipulator limbs, signaling for silence. Slowly, reluctantly, the chamber quieted. The High Counselor turned his many eyes toward the human ambassador. "Ambassador," he said, his voice carrying a warning that needed no translation, "I do not think you understand the gravity of this situation. The Council has spoken. For 12,000 years, every species has accepted the Council's authority. To refuse is to stand alone against all of us." Nodded slightly. "High Counselor, with respect, I understand perfectly. I also understand that the Council's proposals are not designed to benefit galactic harmony. They are designed to prevent humanity from becoming a significant power." Murmurs rippled through the chamber. It was one thing to refuse the Council's demands. It was another to openly state what everyone knew but no one acknowledged. "You are making serious accusations," Han said carefully. "I am stating facts. The colony sits on 3 major trade routes. Controlling those routes would give the collective enormous economic advantages. Our fleet is already smaller than most established species. Reducing it further would leave us unable to defend our own territory, and the technology restrictions would set our development back by decades." His voice remained calm, but there was steel beneath the words. "This is not negotiation, High Counselor. This is an attempt to cripple us before we become too strong to bully." Ambassador slammed his fist against the railing of his seat. "How dare you accuse the Council of such things? We are trying to maintain order, to prevent conflict, to ensure peace for all species." "Peace for all species," turned to look directly at the ambassador. "Tell me, Ambassador, how did the collective respond when it first received demands from the Council? 3,000 years ago, your species was in the same position mine is in now. Young, growing, threatening to upset the established order." Scales flushed a darker shade of red, but he did not answer. "You accepted the Council's terms," continued. "You gave up territory, you reduced your fleet, you submitted, and for the next 500 years your species struggled. Your expansion was limited, your development was controlled. Eventually, you grew strong enough to earn a place among the powerful, but how much did that submission cost you? How many generations lived in the shadow of what your species could have been?" The chamber was silent now. Words had touched something deep, a truth that many species had buried so long ago they had almost forgotten it existed. "Humanity will not make that choice," she said. "We will not submit to injustice simply because resisting is difficult. We will not sacrifice our future to preserve a system that benefits only those who are already powerful." Han studied the human ambassador for a long moment. He was old enough to remember the submission and many others before it. He knew the truth of her words, even if he could not admit it openly. "And if the Council chooses to enforce these proposals," he asked quietly, "if we send our fleets to compel your compliance, then humanity will resist. You cannot possibly hope to stand against the combined military power of 47 species." Smiled slightly. It was not a warm expression. "High Counselor, humanity has spent 200 years preparing for this moment. We knew that eventually the established powers would see us as a threat. We knew that we would face this choice, submit or fight. We chose to prepare for both possibilities." She nodded to, who stepped forward and activated a holographic display. Data began scrolling across the chamber's screens, showing fleet positions, defense installations, weapons systems, and technological specifications. Several representatives gasped at what they saw. The Council's peacekeeping fleet consists of approximately 37,000 vessels, said. Humanity maintains a defensive force of 12,000 ships. Smaller, yes, but our ships are faster than anything in the Council fleet. Our weapons are designed specifically to counter your standard tactics. Our shields can withstand your primary armaments, and our crews have trained for this fight since before most of them were born. Impossible, snarled. No young species could develop such capabilities in 200 years. The Council has spent 12,000 years assuming that young species cannot surprise you. That assumption has made you careless. His voice hardened. We studied your histories, your battles, your strategies. We learned from your mistakes and your successes. We identified your weaknesses and built our entire military doctrine around exploiting them. Han's many eyes moved across the data on the screens. His species had not survived 400 years of politics without learning to recognize truth when they saw it. The humans were not bluffing. Somehow, impossibly, they had prepared for exactly this moment. What does humanity want? He asked. We want what every species wants: the right to grow and develop without interference, fair access to trade routes, a voice in galactic affairs. Paused. We want equality, High Counselor, not dominance, not revenge, just the chance to stand as partners rather than subjects. These things cannot be granted overnight. There are procedures, traditions, agreements that go back thousands of years. Then begin the process of changing them. We are patient. We can wait for fairness to be achieved through proper channels. Her eyes narrowed. But we will not wait while Council fleets threaten our worlds. We will not negotiate while our people live under the shadow of destruction. The chamber fell into a heavy silence. Representatives exchanged uncertain glances. For the first time in living memory, the Council faced a species that would not bend. Ambassador rose again, his voice trembling with barely controlled fury. The Council cannot simply accept this defiance. If we allow one species to refuse our authority, others will follow. The entire system will collapse. Perhaps, said quietly, that would not be such a bad thing. Han raised his manipulator limb once more. This session is suspended. The Council will deliberate in private. Ambassador, you and your aide will be escorted to quarters where you will wait for our decision. As and were led from the chamber, she could feel the weight of countless eyes on her back. She had done what no species had done in 8,000 years. She had told the Galactic Council no. Now she would find out what that word would cost. The Council's deliberations lasted 3 days. During that time, Ambassador and Marshal remained in their assigned quarters, a comfortable suite of rooms that was clearly designed to impress visitors with the Council's wealth and power. Spent the hours reviewing reports from Earth and preparing for whatever came next. On the morning of the 4th day, her tablet received a priority alert from the system. A Council peacekeeping fleet had been detected at the system's edge. 4,000 ships, armed and ready for combat. They're calling our bluff, said, his voice tight with fear. Shook her head. We weren't bluffing, they'll learn that soon enough. 12,000 light-years away, Admiral Price stood on the bridge of the carrier, relentless, watching her tactical display with the focused calm that had made her famous. She was 61 years old, with short gray hair and a face that rarely showed emotion. She had commanded the 1st Defense Fleet for 15 years, and she had trained her crews for exactly this moment. Admiral, enemy fleet is holding position at the system boundary, Lieutenant Peter reported from his communications station. They're hailing us. Put them through. The main flickered to life, showing an officer in an elaborate uniform covered with symbols of rank and honor. His segmented body shifted with poorly concealed confidence. Human vessels, I am Fleet Commander Al of the Council Peacekeeping Force. You are ordered to stand down and withdraw from this system immediately. This is your only warning. Failure to comply will be considered an act of war. Admiral Price smiled slightly. It was not a friendly expression. Fleet Commander, I am Admiral Price of the United Earth Navy. You have entered sovereign human territory without permission. I suggest you leave. You cannot be serious. Do you understand who you are speaking to? Do you know what force stands ready to destroy you? I know exactly what force you have brought, Commander. 4,000 ships, primarily cruisers and destroyers, with a carrier group providing fighter support. Standard council formation for intimidation operations. Smile widened slightly. I also know that your ships are slow, your weapons predictable, and your tactics have not changed in 3,000 years. Al's mandibles clicked with anger. You have 15 minutes to begin your withdrawal. After that, we will remove you by force. The transmission ended. Turned to her tactical officer, Commander Hayes, a quiet man who had served with her for a decade. Enemy formation analysis. Standard siege pattern, Admiral. They're positioning to surround the colony and establish a blockade. Looks like they expect us to retreat or defend in place. Neither of which we're going to do. Studied the display for a moment. Signal the fleet. Initiate Protocol 7. The Relentless shuddered as her engines engaged at full power. Across the system, 3,200 human ships began to move, not away from the enemy and not toward defensive positions around the colony. They accelerated directly toward the Council fleet at speeds that should have been impossible. On the Council flagship, Fleet Commander Al watched his tactical display with growing confusion and then alarm. The human ships were covering the distance between the two fleets in a fraction of the time his calculations had predicted. Their formation was unlike anything in his database, a fluid pattern that seemed to shift and change as it moved. All ships prepare for combat, he ordered. Launch fighters, raise shields, target the lead enemy vessels. His commands came too late. The first wave of human missiles reached the Council fleet before their shields were fully active. The missiles were small, easy to overlook among the thousands of contacts on the scanners. The Council's point defense systems largely ignored them, focusing instead on larger threats that never came. The missiles detonated not against hulls but in empty space, releasing massive electromagnetic pulses that swept across the Council formation. Sensors went blind. Communications dissolved into static. Hundreds of ships found themselves isolated, unable to see or hear anything beyond their own hulls. By the time their systems began to recover, the human fleet was among them. Admiral Price had spent her entire career studying warfare. She understood that in a straight fight, numbers would eventually win. The Council had more ships, more resources, more everything, so she had no intention of fighting straight. Human ships darted through the Council formation like wolves among sheep. Their superior speed let them strike and withdraw before the larger, slower enemy vessels could respond. Their weapons were precisely targeted, hitting engines and weapon systems while leaving hulls intact. They did not want to destroy the Council ships. They wanted to disable them. Commander Al tried to rally his forces, but his communications were jammed. He tried to reposition his flagship, but a human destroyer had already crippled his engines. He watched helplessly as his fleet fell apart around him. In less than an hour, it was over. 4,000 Council ships drifted in space, their weapons silent, their engines dead. Not one had been destroyed. Not one human ship had been lost. It was the most one-sided battle in galactic history, and it had not even been close. Fleet Commander Al, Admiral Price's voice came through on every Council ship's emergency channel. Your fleet is disabled but intact. We have no desire to destroy you. Withdraw now and we will not pursue. Repair your ships and go home. Tell the Council what happened here. Tell them that humanity does not want war. But tell them also that we are ready for it if war is what they choose. There was a long silence. Then slowly, the Council ships began to move. Repair crews worked frantically to restore basic functions. One by one, the vessels limped toward the system's edge and the safety of faster-than-light travel. Al was the last to leave. His flagship was barely functional, crawling through space on emergency power. Before he jumped to safety, he took one last look at the human fleet, holding formation around the colony they had been sent to threaten. He had commanded peacekeeping operations for 80 years. He had brought dozens of species to heal, crushed rebellions, ended wars. He had never lost a battle. He had never even come close to losing a battle. Today, he had not just lost. He had been humiliated. The humans had defeated his entire fleet without killing a single member of his crew. They had treated the might of the Council like a minor inconvenience, something to be dealt with and dismissed. As his ship jumped into faster-than-light travel, Al found himself feeling something he had not felt in decades. Fear. Real, genuine fear of what the humans might do next. On Nexus Prime, the Council watched recordings of the battle in stunned silence. The footage showed everything: the speed of the human ships, the precision of their attacks, the utter helplessness of the peacekeeping fleet. When the recording ended, no one spoke for a long time. High Counselor Han finally broke the silence. "It seems," he said slowly, "that we have badly underestimated humanity." Ambassador Scales had gone pale. "How is this possible? They are children compared to us. 200 years of space travel. 200 years and they can do this." "The evidence is before your eyes, Ambassador." Han turned to face the assembled council. "The question now is not how this happened. The question is what we do next." The debate that followed would last for days. But as watched the battle footage from her quarters on the station, she allowed herself a small smile. Phase 1 was complete. Humanity had proven it could not be intimidated. Now came the harder part, proving that it could also be trusted. The emergency session of the Galactic Council began at midnight. Every member species was present, either in person or through holographic projection. The chamber that had witnessed 12,000 years of history had never felt so tense. High Counselor Han had not slept since news of the battle reached the station. His ancient body ached with exhaustion, but his mind was sharp. He understood that the next few hours would determine the future of galactic civilization. "We face a situation without precedent," he began, his translated voice carrying to every corner of the vast chamber. "The peacekeeping fleet has been defeated. 4,000 ships, disabled without a single loss on the human side. We must consider our response carefully." Ambassador rose immediately. His earlier rage had transformed into something colder and more dangerous. "There is only one possible response: full mobilization. We gather every ship from every member species and crush these humans before they become any stronger." "And how many ships would we lose in such an effort?" Han asked quietly. "It does not matter how many we lose. What matters is that we win. The Council's authority must be preserved at any cost." "Any cost?" Han let the words hang in the air. "Tell me, Ambassador, what is the current strength of the fleet?" Hesitated. "Approximately 8,000 vessels." "And if we launch a full assault on human space, how many of those ships would survive?" "Our analysts estimate significant losses." "How many?" "Perhaps 60% casualties." 60%, nearly 5,000 ships destroyed, and that is just the contribution. Han turned to face the full council. "A total mobilization would involve over 100,000 vessels. If the humans fight as effectively as they did we could lose half of them. 50,000 ships, millions of crew members. The military strength of a dozen species, broken in a single campaign." The chamber was silent. The numbers were terrifying, but what frightened the representatives even more was the uncertainty. The humans had shown capabilities that no one had predicted. What other surprises might they have waiting? "There is another consideration," Han continued. "The humans disabled the peacekeeping fleet without destroying it. They let our ships withdraw. They could have killed thousands of our people, but they chose not to. What does that tell us about their intentions?" Ambassador made a dismissive gesture. It tells us nothing. They are weak. They do not have the stomach for real war. Or perhaps it tells us that they truly do not want war, that they would prefer peace if peace can be achieved fairly. Han paused. Consider what they have asked for: the right to keep their own territory, fair access to trade routes, a voice in galactic affairs. These are not the demands of conquerors. These are the requests of a species that wants to be treated as an equal. Equals? His voice dripped with contempt. They are 200 years old. We have been traveling the stars for thousands of years before they learned to make fire. They are not our equals. They never will be. From across the chamber, a new voice spoke. The ETH ambassador rarely participated in council debates. Their species was ancient, even older than and they preferred to observe rather than interfere. When they spoke, everyone listened. They were once young as well, the crystalline being said, their voice like wind chimes in a storm. As were we. Age is not wisdom, ambassador, and power is not right. What are you suggesting? That we simply allow these humans to defy us? That we let them dictate terms to the council? I am suggesting that we examine why they us in the first place. The ETH's form flickered with inner light. The council offered them injustice dressed as law. Their territory would be taken. Their strength would be reduced. Their future would be controlled. They refused because refusing was the only honorable choice. Honor? Laughed bitterly. What does honor have to do with politics? Perhaps that is the problem. The ETH turned their crystalline gaze toward the High Counselor. For 12,000 years, the Council has maintained order through power. Young species submit because they have no choice. We have grown comfortable with this arrangement. We have forgotten that strength is not the same as justice. Han nodded slowly. He was thinking about the Council's history, about the dozens of species that had been forced to submit over the. He remembered the proud and angry accepting terms that diminished them. He remembered other species, their names now half forgotten, whose civilizations had been ground down to nothing because they had dared to resist. And he thought about the human ambassador, standing alone in this very chamber, speaking one word that had shattered everything. The humans have shown us something important, Han said finally. They have shown us that submission is not the only option, that a young species can prepare, can plan, can become strong enough to stand on its own. Which is exactly why we must destroy them now, insisted. Before others get the same idea, before the entire system collapses. And if others already have the same idea, if other species have been watching this confrontation, learning from it, preparing for their own moment of defiance, Han shook his head. We cannot destroy every species that refuses to bow. We cannot fight wars on 100 fronts simultaneously. The Council's power has always rested on the belief that resistance is futile. The humans have proven that belief false. No amount of military force will restore it. The chamber fell silent as the representatives absorbed his words. The truth was difficult to accept, but it was truth nonetheless. The old order was broken. Something new would have to take its place. What do you propose? The ETH asked. I propose that we talk to them. Really talk, not issue demands and expect compliance. The humans say they want equality, fairness, partnership. Perhaps we should discover if they mean it. And if this is a trap, if they use our negotiations to buy time for further preparations, then we will deal with that when it happens. But I do not believe it is a trap. The humans could have destroyed our fleet. They chose not to. That choice means something. Han turned to address the full council. We have spent 12,000 years building an empire of fear. Perhaps it is time to try something different. Ambassador looked around the chamber, seeking support for continued resistance. He found none. Even his fellow representatives were silent, their expressions uncertain. This is a mistake, he said finally. You are showing weakness when we should show strength. The humans will see this as victory and they will push for more. Perhaps, Han acknowledged. Or perhaps they will see it as the first step toward genuine peace. We will not know until we try." He turned to one of his aides. "Contact Ambassador. Inform her that the Council wishes to resume discussions. Real discussions this time with no predetermined outcomes. Tell her that we are prepared to listen." The aide hurried away. Around the chamber, representatives began talking among themselves, some hopeful, some fearful, some simply confused. The galaxy they had known for 12,000 years was changing, and none of them knew what it would become. In her quarters, received the message with a mixture of relief and caution. The first battle had been won. The Council was willing to talk, but she knew that the hardest part was still ahead. Wars were simple. Peace was complicated. Building trust between species that had been enemies would take years, perhaps decades. There would be setbacks and disappointments and moments when everything seemed about to fall apart. But for the first time, there was hope. Real hope that the galaxy could become something better than it had been. Began preparing for the next round of negotiations. This time, she would not be saying no. This time, she would be building yes. 3 months had passed since the battle at. 3 months of negotiations, arguments, compromises, and careful progress. The galaxy had watched as humanity and the Council talked, debated, and slowly, painfully built the foundations of something new. Ambassador returned to the Council chamber on a morning that felt different from her first visit. The walk to the speaking platform was the same, the 700 meters rising above her still filled with thousands of alien representatives. But the atmosphere had changed. The contempt she had felt before was gone, replaced by something more complex: curiosity, uncertainty, and in some eyes, genuine respect. High Counselor hand greeted her from his elevated platform. "Ambassador, thank you for returning. I know these months have been difficult for all parties." "They have been necessary, High Counselor, difficult but necessary." Took her place at the speaking platform. Marshall stood behind her, his tablet filled with the details of the agreement they had worked so hard to achieve. "The Council has reviewed the final draft of the treaty," Hand said. "Before we proceed to a vote, I believe you wish to address the Assembly." Nodded. She looked up at the gathered representatives, at the faces and forms of 47 different species, each with their own histories, their own fears, their own hopes. What she said now would shape the future of all of them. 3 months ago, I stood in this chamber and spoke a single word. No, that word changed everything. It began a confrontation that could have led to war, to destruction, to suffering on a scale that none of us truly wanted. She paused, letting her words settle. But it also opened a door to conversation, to understanding, to the possibility of something better. She turned slowly, addressing different sections of the chamber. "I know that many of you are still uncertain about what we are proposing. The treaty before you represents a fundamental change in how the Council operates. It challenges traditions that have existed for thousands of years. It asks you to accept a species that you as an equal partner. These concerns are valid. Change is frightening. The unknown is frightening. But I want you to consider what the alternative would be." Her voice grew quieter, more serious. "Without this treaty, humanity and the Council remain adversaries. Perhaps not at war, but not at peace either. We watch each other with suspicion. We prepare for conflicts that might never come but drain our resources nonetheless. We waste opportunities for cooperation because we cannot trust each other. With this treaty, we begin a different path. Not an easy path. Trust must be earned, and that takes time. There will be disagreements, disappointments, moments when old fears seem justified. But there will also be possibilities. Trade that benefits all parties. Scientific exchanges that advance everyone's knowledge. A galaxy that grows stronger through cooperation rather than weaker through competition." She looked up at Han. "Humanity did not come to the stars seeking enemies. We came seeking partners. We came hopping to learn from civilizations far older and wiser than our own. The Council's original demands made that impossible. This treaty makes it possible again." Han nodded slowly. "The High Council has studied the treaty extensively. We have concerns, but we also see the opportunities you describe." He turned to address the assembly. "The key provisions are as follows. Humanity will retain all current territory, including the colony. Human representatives will be granted full membership in the Council, with voting rights equal to any established species. Trade routes will be open to all parties under fair and transparent regulations. In exchange," he continued, "humanity agrees to share certain defensive technologies with the Council peacekeeping forces. They agree to participate in collective security arrangements, and they agree to submit territorial disputes to arbitration rather than unilateral action." Ambassador rose from his seat. His earlier fury had faded over the months of negotiation, replaced by something more like grudging acceptance. "I wish to speak." Han nodded permission. "I opposed this process from the beginning," said, his voice carrying across the chamber. "I believed that humanity's defiance was an insult that demanded punishment. I believed that negotiating with them would show weakness." He paused, his scaled features shifting. "I was wrong." The admission caused murmurs throughout the chamber. The ambassador continued. "My species accepted the Council's demands 3,000 years ago. We submitted because we had no choice. For generations afterward, we struggled under limitations that others had imposed on us. We grew strong eventually, but the memory of that submission never entirely faded." He turned to look at. "The humans chose differently. They refused to submit, and instead of destroying them, their refusal forced us to question ourselves. To ask whether the system we have maintained for so long is truly just, or merely powerful. I do not know if this treaty will succeed. I do not know if humanity can be trusted with the responsibilities of Council membership, but I know that continuing on the old path was no longer possible. The humans showed us that. For that, if nothing else, they have earned my respect." Sat down. The chamber was silent for a moment, processing what they had just heard. One of the Council's most vocal opponents of humanity had just endorsed the treaty. The ETH ambassador spoke next. "The ETH have observed galactic civilization for longer than most species can remember. We have seen empires built on fear collapse under their own weight. We have seen alliances built on mutual respect endure for. This treaty represents a choice between those two paths. Humanity is young. They have much to learn about the complexities of galactic politics, but they have already taught us something valuable. They have reminded us that strength without justice is tyranny, and that even the mighty must sometimes listen to the voices of those they would rule." The ETH vote in favor of the treaty. One by one, other species added their voices. Some spoke of hope, some spoke of caution. Some simply stated their vote without explanation. When the final count was tallied, the treaty passed by a margin that surprised even its supporters. Han announced the results. "The Treaty of Nexus Prime is: humanity is hereby granted full membership in the Galactic Council, with all rights and responsibilities that membership entails." The chamber erupted in something that was not quite celebration, but was certainly not the chaos of 3 months earlier. Representatives congratulated each other, discussed the implications, speculated about the future. In the midst of it all, stood quietly, feeling the weight of the moment settle over her. Marshall touched her arm. "Ambassador, are you all right?" Smiled. It was a tired smile, but genuine. "I'm fine, just thinking about what comes next." "What does come next?" "The hard part, making this work, proving that humanity deserves the trust we've been given." She looked around the chamber at the dozens of species that were now officially their partners. "We've spent 200 years preparing to say no. Now we have to learn how to say yes." Later, as the Endurance prepared to depart Nexus Prime, stood at the viewing port and watched the great station shrink behind them. Somewhere in that station, representatives from 47 species were beginning the long process of adjusting to a new reality. Some would embrace the change. Others would resist it, but none could ignore it. Humanity had come to the stars as strangers, uncertain and alone. They had faced a test that could have destroyed them and emerged stronger. They had refused to submit to injustice, and in doing so, they had changed the course of galactic history. It had started with one word: no. A refusal to accept terms that were unfair, to bow to power that was unjust, to sacrifice the future for the sake of immediate survival. But it had not ended there. It had continued with another word: yes. An acceptance of responsibility, of partnership, of the hard work of building something better than what had existed before. The galaxy was changing. It would not happen quickly, and it would not happen easily. There would be setbacks and failures and moments of doubt. But for the first time in 12,000 years, there was genuine hope that the future could be different from the past. And it had all begun because one species, young and bold and unwilling to kneel, had looked at the assembled might of galactic civilization and spoken a simple truth. No, we will not submit. We will not surrender our future. We will stand, and if you force us to fight, we will fight. But if you offer us fairness, we will be the best partners you have ever known. The stars spread out before the Endurance, countless points of light representing countless possibilities, watched them and smiled. The real journey was just beginning.